Hey everyone, welcome to part 105 of my Pokemon game series in Unity. So in this video, we'll refactor our inventory system to use the GenericSelector component and the StateStack architecture. So selection in the inventory is not as simple as the other selections we have done so far. Here, whenever the selected item changes, we also have to update the item's icon and description in the inventory UI. And here we also have scrolling. So in this video, we look at how to extend the selection logic of the GenericSelector UI to handle cases like this. Alright, so let's look at how to implement this. By the way, I started a new series on Patreon that covers how to make a 3D Pokemon game like Pokemon Legends Arceus in Unity. So if you're interested in making a 3D Pokemon game or a 3D RPG game in general, then you can check out this course on Patreon. So by becoming a Patreon, you can support this channel and get access to the 3D Pokemon series and get some other cool rewards like the complete project files of the series, some exclusive tutorials, and access to the Discord community. So before we start, I want to say a huge thanks to all the Patreons who are currently supporting the channel. You guys make the series possible, and I'm grateful to each and every one of you. So let's start the video. So first, let me refactor the inventory UI to use the GenericSelector. So let me open up the inventory UI script. Okay, so first we have to make the inventory UI inherit from the selection UI class. Okay, so to use the selection UI class, we have to import this namespace. So we have done this so many times now, so I'm not going to explain every detail of it. So let's convert the inventory UI to use the GenericSelector. So here we don't need to keep track of the selected item because the selection will be handled from the selection UI class. Okay, but in the inventory UI we have two selections, item selection and category selection, right? We can use the left and right arrow keys to change the item category. So the category selection will not be handled from the selection UI, it'll be handled from our inventory UI script itself. Okay, so what we have to do is we have to keep the code for selecting the category. Okay, so we can't simply call the handle update function of the selection UI. Instead, we have to override the handle update function. So here you can see the handle update function is virtual in case you want to override it and customize some behaviors. So from here, we will override the handle update function. Okay, and then when we call base.handle update, this will run the logic for selecting the item. So from here, we just have to take care of the logic for selecting the category. Okay, so let me just copy all this code into our new handle update function. Okay, and from here we can remove the code for selecting the item because that will be handled by the base.handle update call. Okay, so we only need the code for handling the category, and we can remove the code for selecting the item. Okay, so we don't need this line where we keep track of the previous selection, and we also don't need this line where we are clamping the selected item. Okay, and we also don't have to call the update item selection function. Okay, so we're just handling the category selection from here, and the item selection will be handled by the base.handle update function. Okay, so now we can remove our old handle update function. And by the way, this also has some extra code for handling things like party selection and move to forget selection and all that. But we won't be using this. We'll be handling this as separate states in our state stack. Okay, so we can just get rid of the handle update function. All right. So next we have to change the update item selection function. So this is a function responsible for highlighting the item changes in the UI, right? But when the item selection changes in the UI, we also have some custom logic like changing the icon and the description of the item, and we also have scrolling in our item list, right? So just like our handle update function, we have to execute some custom logic while we change the item selection in the UI. Okay, so simply calling the update selection in UI function won't work. So what we have to do is, just like we did for the handle update function, we have to make this a virtual function and we have to override it from the inventory UI class. Okay, so let me make this a public virtual function so that we can override it. And I'll override the function from here. Okay, so calling the base function will highlight the selection in the item list, but then we also have to do some extra things like showing the item icon and description. So let me just copy this code into our new update selection in UI function. And from here we can remove the code for highlighting the item in the list because that will be handled by the base function. Okay, so now let's get rid of the old update item selection function. Okay, so now we have an error over here. That's because we are calling the old update item selection function. So let's replace that with the new one. Okay, and from here we also have to set the items into the selection UI when we load the inventory UI. Okay, so we can do it from this function. So here we already have the list of item slots. So from here we can call set items and we can pass the list of items. But note that here we have to pass a list of text slots, right? So we have to convert this list into a list of text slots. So we can do that by using the select function. Okay, so for each slot we have to call the get component function and get the text slot. All right, and finally we'll call the toList function to convert it to a list. Okay, so this is all we have to do to make the inventory UI use the GenericSelector. So now if we go to Unity, we should have few errors here. So let me go ahead and fix those. So this is because we are calling the old handle update function, which has parameters. So from the game controller, we can remove this code because we are not going to use the enum state. All this will be handled from our state machine, right? So next we have two other places where we're calling the handle update. So one is inside the battle system. So let me just comment this from here. We'll look into this when we refactor the battle system. So similarly, we're also calling this from the shop controller. So let me also comment this here. Okay, so now we should not have any errors. We have one over here, but if we clear it, it should be gone because it was an error during serialization. All right. So next we have to add the text slot script into our item slot. So let me open up the items list in the inventory UI. And here we have the item UI prefab. So to this, we have to add the text slot script. Okay. So in the item list, the item name is the one that you want to highlight, right? So for the text, I'll assign the item name text. Okay. So that is all you have to do to make the inventory UI use the generic selector. So next, let's use the StateStack for handling the inventory state. So in the game states folder inside script, I'll create a new state for the inventory. So let me create a C# script called inventory state. Okay. Let me just get rid of the default code here. So inventory state is going to inherit from the state class. And to use the state class, we have to import the gdutils.stateMachine namespace. Okay. So this is going to be a state of the game controller. All right. So first, we have to make the state a singleton. So let me just copy the code for that from the game party state. All right, and let me change this to the inventory state. So now this class is a singleton. So next, from the inventory state, we need a reference to the inventory UI, right? So let me create a serialized field variable here. All right. And next, from the enter function, we have to enable the inventory UI. So I'll call inventory UI dot game object dot set actor true. Okay. And then we also have to listen to the on selected and on back events. So let me assign a function to the on selected event first. So here I'll assign a function called on item selected. Okay. And then let me also assign a function to the on back function. All right. So we have to create these functions here. So we'll handle the item selection later. So let me also create the on back function. So from the on back function, we just have to pop the current state, right? And to pop the state, we need a reference to the game controller. So let me cache a reference to the game controller from here. Okay. And from the on back, we can just pop the current state. Okay. So here we have an error because the on selected event has an integer parameter. So let me define it here. And the error should be gone. So from the enter function, we enable the UI and subscribe to the events. So next, from the execute function, we have to call the handle update of the inventory UI. Okay. And then from the exit function, we have to disable the inventory UI, and we also have to unsubscribe from the events. So let me go ahead and do that. Okay, so we have defined our inventory state. So let's go ahead and push the state when we select the bag from the menu. So when a menu item is selected, and if the selection is equal to 1, then that means bag is selected. Okay, and in that case we can just push the inventory state. All right, so now let's go to Unity and let's assign the inventory state to our game controller. Okay, let me drag and drop it here, and we have to assign the inventory UI. All right, so now let's try testing this and see if the inventory selection is working. Okay, so if I select back from the menu, you can see that it opens the inventory UI and the inventory selection is working. Okay, so when we change the selection, we are not really updating it in the list, but we are also changing the icon and description of the item. Okay, and we are also handling scrolling. All right, and next let's test if category selection is working. So yeah, you can see the category selection is also working when we are using the left and right arrows. Okay, so now the inventory UI is using the GenericSelector and the StateStack architecture. But right now, nothing happens when we select an item and press Z. So we also have to handle this using the StateStack architecture. Right. Earlier, we were just handling this as a substate inside the inventory. But that is not really a good approach because from the inventory, we have to handle things like party selection and selecting the move to forget and all that. Right. So this should be a separate state and we have to push the state when an item is selected from the inventory UI. Okay, so that is the benefit of using the state stack. We don't have to create nested state machines and all that. We just have to push a state on top. Right. So let's go ahead and use the state stack architecture for using the item. So from the inventory state, when an item is selected, we have to push the party state so that the player can select a Pokemon on which the item can be used. Okay, so I'll push the party state from here. All right, and then from the party state, when a Pokemon is selected, we should check if the previous state from which we switched to the party state was the inventory state. And if the previous state was inventory state, then we have to use the selected item on the selected Pokemon. Right. So if the party screen was opened directly, then we have to open the party screen. And otherwise, if the party screen was opened from the inventory state, then we have to use the selected item on the Pokemon. All right. So first we have to find the state from which we switched to the party state. So since we are using a state stack, we have the track of all the previous states. Right. So let me open the state machine class. So here in the stack, we have the track of all the previous states. So from the stack, we just have to get the previous state from which we switched to the party state. Right. So in our state machine class, I'll create a function for retrieving the previous state. Okay. So I'll create a public function called get previous state, and this function will return a state. Okay. So to get the previous state from the stack, we can call StateStack dot element at function. Okay, so this is a link function, so you have to import link, and here we can pass the index of the element that we want to return. So in a stack, the top item will be in the 0th index. Okay, so element at 0 will give us the top state, which is the current state, but we want the previous state, right? So here we can just pass 1 for the index. All right, so we can just return this value from our function. So this will give us the previous state. So let's go ahead and call it from here. Okay, and if the previous state is equal to the inventory state, then we want to use the item, right? And otherwise, if the previous state is not the inventory state, that means the party screen was opened directly. In that case, we just want to show the summary screen. So I'll move this code into the else. All right. So next, we have to write the code for using the item, but I don't want to write it here because this is the party state. So the code for using the item should not be written here. Instead, what I'll do is I'll create a separate state called use item state, and the code for using the item will be in that state. Okay, so we'll be doing that in the next video. For now, let's just do a debug.log here for testing if this is working. Okay, so let me go to Unity and test this. All right, so if I open the inventory and press Z, then it'll open the party screen. And then if I select the Pokemon and press Z, you can see that use item is printed in the console. Okay, so that is working fine. So next we have to write the code for actually using the item. So as I mentioned before, that will be a separate state which we can easily push on top of our party state. Okay, so I'll be implementing that in the next video. So I'll stop the video here. Thanks a lot for watching. Before you leave, make sure to leave a like on the video and consider subscribing to my channel. That will really help me out. And you can also support the series on Patreon if you can afford it. Alright, so I'll see you in the next video.